Hi everyone. So today we're going to start Unit 7. We are in our last WAP time period, which is very exciting. So the last WAP time period is 1900 to the present, and we're going to have 3 units, 7, 8, and 9. Unit 7 is called Global Conflict, and we're going to talk about world wars, revolutions, Great Depression, a lot of global events that include some major conflicts. So we're going to start with World War One. World War One has many nicknames. It was called the Great War. It was called, like on your notes, the War to End All Wars, because it was so much more devastating than any war that had been fought. People didn't think it would ever, there'd ever be a more devastating conflict, although World War II happened. So today we're going to do part of the notes and then start working on the other paper that you have, which is Causes of World War I. Okay, so an easy way to remember the main causes of World War I is through the acronym MAIN. So the M stands for militarism. Militarism is just a rise in military sizes and military equipment, and there's going to be lots of innovations. Basically, it's like as if all these countries involved knew there was going to be a conflict and they were preparing for it over time. So some examples of militarism: the institution of conscription, which is the draft in most European nations. Military sizes doubled between 1890 and 1914, which 1914 is the start of the war. Many countries had developed detailed plans of attack in case of war, so they started making plans for different scenarios. Like, if we go to war with this country, here's how we're going to fight. If we go to war with that country, here's how we're going to attack or defend ourselves. So there was a lot of tension in Europe at the time that led people to believe that a war was going to be inevitable, and they were actively preparing for it. And then we're going to learn too about a lot of new weapons and technologies that were developed that helped make World War I the deadliest war that had ever taken place up until this point. The second letter, A, is for alliance systems. And you're going to learn soon how the alliances had a big impact on drawing countries into the war. There's 2 main alliances you need to know. The Triple Entente, also called the Allies, were Great Britain, France, and Russia. Great Britain, France, and Russia. The Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and then the Ottoman Empire. And people always ask, well, why is it triple if there's 4? Both of these alliances started with these 3 countries each, but then other people joined the alliances over time. And you can see the Triple Entente is highlighted in blue on the map. The Triple Alliance is highlighted in red, and these are going to be the major countries that are fighting. And then the I stands for imperialism. We just finished learning about imperialism. Here's a map of major empires of the world in 1900, just before the war started. And there's 2 kind of ways to look at this, how it caused the war. We learned that imperialism led to really intense competition between countries. So that competitive spirit was still happening in Europe, and that contributed to the tension between these different countries. The other way to look at it is that imperialism is definitely going to help these countries fight this war. So it's going to give them resources that they can use for their factories, produce weapons and supplies for the war. It's also going to provide soldiers to actually fight the war. So this is one of the first really global conflicts where Europeans are using people from Africa, India, Australia, all different colonies to fight alongside them against their enemies. And then the N stands for nationalism. So nationalism, the way to look at it in this conflict is through the lens of competition, where nationalism, you want your country to be the best, and you are going to compete with other countries to make sure that you're the best. This also is through the lens of multinational or multi-ethnic empires, because there were large empires in Europe at the time that had different groups within those empires who wanted to be independent. So a good example are the Slavs in Austria-Hungary. Excuse me. So this is the Empire of Austria-Hungary. It kind of goes like above the map here. And Austria-Hungary had Austrians, it had Hungarians, but it had a lot of other groups too. Some of them are part of Austria-Hungary in the north. A lot of them are part of the Ottoman Empire. And those groups want to have their own nation for their own people. And so they're kind of disgruntled, and that plays into the war. Another example is Poland over here, which at this time was not a country. It was part of Russia, but they feel nationalism and they want to have their own country. So these multi-ethnic empires, there's like these simmering tensions of nationalism in there. And this is going to come into play when we look at the map of Europe after the World War. It looks significantly different because a lot of these people are going to get their own country. Okay, so that are the main causes. Now we're going to look at the outbreak of war. It's really like a chain reaction of events. So wars had broken out in the Balkans, which is the circled region on the map, in 1912 and 1913 due to nationalist pressures within the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary. So like I said, a lot of those groups down there, they felt very strong nationalism for their people, and they wanted their own country, and they didn't like either Austria-Hungary's rule or the Ottoman rule. And this led to this region called the Balkans being called the powder keg of Europe. So a powder keg is like a barrel of gunpowder. The powder keg is something very, very explosive. So if just one spark hits a powder keg, it's going to have a huge explosion. And so the metaphor here is that this region, there's all these tensions happening. And so just one little spark or one little event is going to send it over the edge into an explosion or a major conflict. So I'll explain a little bit about some of those tensions. So Serbia, right here, had wanted to, so a lot of these areas here had been slowly getting their independence from either Austria-Hungary or the Ottoman Empire down here. And Serbia, right here, wanted to expand its borders to include Slavic minorities from Austria-Hungary. So a lot of the people down here, they're Serbian or Romanian or whatever, but their collective ethnic group is Slavic. And in Austria-Hungary, right here in the southern part, there were a lot of Slavs living there. And so Serbia's idea is that those people should break off from Austria-Hungary and come join Serbia. Austria-Hungary doesn't want that. They want to keep their empire. They want to be powerful. And so they actually, rather than allowing those people to become independent, they took over new territory, which was Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is right here. So this was kind of like throwing it in Serbia's face. And so Serbia felt outraged by this, that this was an infringement on Slavic nationalism. And so there's going to be tension between Austria-Hungary and Serbia over this issue. Another factor at play is that Russia, which is over here in pink, was a loose ally with Serbia. Russia didn't really want to get involved. They don't really want to start a war over this, but they have a loose alliance because Russians are Slavic people too. And so Serbia kind of feels like it has the backing of Russia over here. So the spark that lit the powder keg, or like what's the event that just sets off the conflict, is this. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he was the crown prince or like the heir to Austria's throne. Once Austria had annexed Bosnia, the royal family sent him out to visit Bosnia and kind of do like a goodwill tour, kind of like welcoming Bosnia as part of Austria-Hungary. The Serbs saw this as their opportunity to strike back against Austria annexing Bosnia. And a Serbian terrorist organization called the Black Hand assassinated the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary while he was visiting the new territory of Bosnia as retaliation. So that assassination of the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary is the spark that lit the powder keg. Okay, so then what happens from there? And we're going to see how the alliances come into play. So Austria-Hungary's response to this assassination is they want to just attack Serbia. They would like probably to just wipe Serbia off the face of the earth, destroy Slavic nationalism, and not have to worry about that anymore. But Austria-Hungary has pause. They're a little concerned because remember, one of Serbia's allies is Russia. So they know if they're going to attack Serbia, Russia might come to Serbia's defense, and that could create all kinds of problems for Austria-Hungary. And so they go to one of their allies, Germany, and ask for help. And they say, Germany, we want to attack Serbia, but we need to know that you're going to back us up. And Germany gave them what's called a blank check, which I know people don't really use checks that much anymore. But giving someone a blank check is a metaphor for like, I'll support you in any way you need. I'll give you anything you need. And so once they have that blank check from Germany, they feel really confident that they can go ahead and attack Serbia. So on July 28th, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Tsar Nicholas of Russia ordered the mobilization of his military in response. So mobilization is like getting the military ready. So he's getting everybody ready, moving them towards the border. He hasn't attacked yet. And so Austria-Hungary and Germany see that Russia is moving its troops, mobilizing. Germany warns Russia, you better not mobilize. You better not bring those troops close to our border or we're going to have a problem. And when Russia still does it, on August 1st, just a couple days later, Germany declared war on Russia after warning it not to mobilize. Okay, so what I want you to see here is that what drew other countries into the war is the alliances. Because this argument, this beef, was originally between Austria and Serbia. But because of the alliance systems, now we have Germany and Russia in the war when they were not involved in the original conflict. So the alliances are huge here. And so also on your paper, it says, what year did the war begin? 1914. And that's a really significant historical year that you should know. Okay, the war was divided into two fronts. A front is just where the fighting is taking place. And so on the Western Front, who is fighting? We're going to have Germany versus Russia and France and Great Britain. And let me just explain like how they got drawn in. So Germany activated its military plans. So remember, I told you with militarism, they had a plan in place for every possible war scenario that's going to happen. And so when they go to war, Germany's like, okay, we know if we're going to go to war against Russia, that Russia's allies are going to come defend it. And Russia's allies were Britain and France. So up until this point, Britain and France weren't even involved in the war yet. Okay, Germany had declared war against Russia, and that's pretty much it. And so what Germany decided is, if we're going to go to war against Russia, we got to kind of think ahead, and we're going to have to fight France and Britain. Germany felt like Russia was going to be the tougher opponent. So their military leaders in Germany had devised this plan that we're going to try to defeat France and Britain quickly and early, and then we can focus all our attention on Russia. All right. So what Germany did is they invaded France. Okay, France isn't even in the war. They're not fighting. They haven't declared war on anybody. Germany has declared war on Russia, and then they, following these military plans, they declare war on France. This draws these countries into the war. They're invading the neutral country of Belgium here to get to France, and they're attacking France like preemptively. And this plan to do this was called the Schlieffen Plan. And so on August 3rd, 1914, Germany declared war on France and invaded. Again, France wasn't even involved. And then Great Britain says, hey, you can't attack our ally of France. And so Great Britain declared war on Germany for invading neutral Belgium and also defending its ally of France. So here is a little political cartoon that shows the alliances drawing people into the war, where each person is like, hey, if you hurt him, I'm going to get you. And then the next person is like, hey, if you hurt him, I'm going to get you. And it just is like a domino effect of all these countries getting drawn in who weren't in the original conflict. So here shows the two-front war. This right here is the Western Front. Okay, so there's fighting taking place over here between Germany and France and Britain pretty much. And then over here, Austria-Hungary and Germany are fighting against Russia. There's other fronts in the war, like you see we have one down here. But for WAP, we really focus on like the causes, the new tactics, and the results of the war. So we're not going to really go into detail about battles and all that kind of stuff for this class. Okay, let's fill in the Eastern Front. So on the Eastern Front, we have Germany and Austria-Hungary versus Russia. Germany and Austria-Hungary versus Russia. We are going to watch a video about new tactics and weapons, and under the Western Front, it says what tactics were used. So watch this video, it'll give you some insight, and then I'll talk more about it.
As Germany invaded the neutral country of Belgium, no one foresaw how long the war would last and how gruesome the cost would be. Over 65 million people fought. Over 20 million were wounded. Between 9 and 10 million died on the battlefield, and another 20 million lost their lives due to hunger and disease related to the war. The magnitude of the killing was unprecedented. In just the first 3 months of the war, nearly the entire original British Army was wiped out. Despite all the carnage, the battle lines remained almost stationary in France. The Western Front, as it was known, was defined by 2 lines of trenches, zigzagging across northern and eastern France for thousands of miles. Wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast and stand erect to fire their machine guns, the trenches were choked with mire, rats, and lice. German soldiers occupied one line, Allied soldiers the other. Between them lay a no-man's land, filled with barbed wire and mud, smoldering with bomb craters. From time to time, soldiers would storm out of these trenches and attempt to overrun the enemy, only to be met with a hail of bullets. Both sides suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties while accomplishing practically nothing, as the battle lines remained essentially unchanged. Meanwhile, the tools of technology, which had provided prosperity for the industrialized world, were now being used to create more efficient and more ghastly weapons. A soldier described the shocking sight of a machine gun that could fire 500 to 600 bullets per minute.
I saw trees as large as a man's thigh, literally cut down by the stream of lead.
In 1914, the German army deployed their new cannon against Belgium. Big Bertha, as it was called, could hurl an 1,800-pound shell 9 miles. A year later, at the Second Battle of Ypres, the Germans introduced poison gas to warfare. Soon, both sides used chemical weapons like chlorine, which suffocated its victims, or mustard gas that burned the skin and blinded its casualties. By 1916, the British Army began using tanks in battle with great success. Before long, however, German soldiers realized that flamethrowers, weapons that could shoot a stream of flaming gasoline, could be used to stop them. Balloons and then airplanes were converted into weapons of war. When Germany attacked the Belgian city of Liège in 1914, it was the first time civilians were killed by a warplane. Planes were fitted with machine guns and loaded with bombs, and soon began dueling in air-to-air combat. These dogfights became a common sight over the skies of Europe. Germany's leading fighter pilot, Manfred Richthofen, nicknamed the Red Baron by the British because of his brightly painted red Albatross airplane, shot down 80 Allied aircraft before being struck by a bullet from the trenches and crashing to his death.
If I should come out of this war alive, I will have more luck than brains.
Okay, so there's a ton of new tactics and weapons. Hopefully you wrote some down where it says list examples. So on Western Front, which tactics were used? The one that you need to write down for sure is trench warfare. And they talked about that in the video. So people thought that this war would be over pretty quickly. Like when the soldiers went off to war, they thought in August or September, they thought they'd be home by Christmas. And that's not at all what happened. The Western Front devolved into a war of attrition. A war of attrition is when you're not even really trying to gain territory, you're just trying to wear the other side down. And both sides, because this war of attrition was like they weren't really gaining or losing much territory, they dug these trenches like you see in the photographs, and they lived in the trenches. Like the trenches were a whole network, kind of like a maze of these open tunnels. They ate, slept, fought from there. And so the tactic of trench warfare is really that you wear down the other side. So what they would do is one side would be in its trench. They would bomb the other side's trench, kind of soften them up, kind of lessen their power for a while. And then once they felt like they had done that sufficiently, they would send their soldiers out across the middle. And the middle part between the trenches was called no man's land. And so they would send their soldiers out to attack the other side's trench. Well, what's the problem when you're running through the middle, through no man's land, is you have no protection. And the other guys are down in their trench with their guns, their machine guns, shooting at you. And so trench warfare, it resulted in very heavy losses and a lot of deaths on both sides because of all the new weapons that we looked at in the video, without really accomplishing a lot. Like not much territory was gained or lost. The trenches also were really disease-ridden. Trench foot was like a foot infection that people got from walking around in like what you see in the top picture, like walking around in water, like dirty water all the time. And so trench warfare and new weapons, so this is like a photo of people running, going across out of their trench to attack the other trench. So like these guys are in no man's land. And these new weapons developed even more deadly weapons as both sides were like, if we could just get something stronger, maybe we could finally break the stalemate. But what happened is that these were the most devastating and deadly weapons the world had ever seen, and resulted in more death than any other war up until this point. So here are some examples of those new weapons. Barbed wire was used to protect the trenches. Here's an early machine gun. Poisonous gas, like you saw in the video, was used a lot. Tanks, airplanes, zeppelins, which you see down here, also submarines. So like these are very modern weapons being used on a large scale for the first time, and it made this war super, super deadly. Here is another video about new tactics. You can add over on the kind of right side some more examples of new tactics.
Even more destruction was waiting on and under the Atlantic Ocean as Germany pressed its Unterseeboots, its submarines, into the battle. German submarines, U-boats, patrolled the Atlantic, firing torpedoes on merchant ships trying to deliver supplies to the Allies. It aroused the anger of Americans in particular because they felt that this was a violation of the principle of the freedom of the seas, long a cornerstone of United States foreign policy. Germany then launched a U-boat blockade in response to the British blockade along the German coast, which in theory prevented contraband, weapons, and military supplies from reaching Germany. But the British definition of contraband was wide-sweeping, including food and fertilizer for crops. 750,000 Germans died of starvation during the British blockade. 75,000 people lost their lives due to German submarine warfare. The blockades continued the pattern of war begun in the trenches. Everywhere, the fighting was inconclusive, while the new technologically advanced weapons made the lack of victories more devastating.
Okay, so World War I was also one of the first really big conflicts that targeted civilians to try to wear the other side down. So they bombed civilians, they used blockades, which really hurt the people like on the home front with not having enough food and supplies. And then submarine warfare was a huge new tactic as well. And you don't have to know battles for this war, but I just put two examples here to show you how deadly it was. Two particularly bloody battles on the Western Front that both resulted in very little territory change. Verdun, over 700,000 people died. The Somme, over 1 million soldiers were killed. So again, the historical development here is that the new tactics and weapons made the war much more deadly than wars in the past. Okay, the Eastern Front changed more frequently than the Western Front. Russia was fighting on the Eastern Front against Germany and Austria-Hungary. Russia suffered several defeats and lost more men than any other nation. So all of this is fueled by the Industrial Revolution, these new tactics, new weapons being produced, new technologies. But if you think about what we know about Russia, is that they struggled to industrialize rapidly and really get that going. And so one of the issues that Russia had is that it didn't always have enough supplies, enough food, enough weapons for its soldiers. Russia was struggling. Another issue Russia had is that this is Tsar Nicholas II, so he's the king of Russia, insisted on personally leading the troops and like being in charge of the war, even though he had not really a lot of military experience and was not qualified to do that. So maybe it would have been better for him to rely on his generals and people like that. And so Russia, it's important to know, was struggling in the war. They suffered more deaths than any other country, and that made the war unpopular in Russia. Okay, we are going to go to the other handout you have, which is Causes of World War I document chart, and I'm going to help you get started on that. So you're going to categorize each of the main documents as one of the causes of war of Maine and explain how it represents that cause. Okay, so Maine is militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And some of them can have more than one. You really just need to explain. So there's a bunch of sources here. I'll do a few with you to get you started. Document 1 is Otto von Bismarck. He's the leader of Germany in the time period leading up to the war, not actually during the war. So he says, Europe today is a powder keg and the leaders are like men smoking in an arsenal. A single spark will set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when that explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damned foolish thing in the Balkans will set it off. So talk to your neighbor for a minute, see what cause you think that represents. So I think it could definitely go for militarism, or it could go for nationalism. And for nationalism, you could explain how in the Balkans, there were a lot of nationalist tensions. There were different groups of people who wanted to become independent from these large empires like Austria-Hungary or the Ottoman Empire. So go ahead and pause here, fill it in, and then I'll do one more with you. So source 2 is a cartoon titled Sitting Tight in the American magazine Punch from 1906. France is attempting to ride the Moroccan camel, but Germany is holding its tail to prevent that. It refers to the first of 2 Moroccan crises. Morocco was technically independent, but under a French sphere of influence, and Germany challenged that. So think about what cause. And hopefully you're immediately thinking imperialism, because we have here France and Germany fighting each other over control of Morocco, which is located in Africa. So go ahead and try to do a few more of these, maybe 4 more. You can talk to your neighbor or talk to your group to help you.